Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back with you after taking an unexpected break last week. You see, I'm discovering that this getting old thing is definitely harder than it seems. I did not record an episode last week because I couldn't sit in a chair for any length of time. I pulled a muscle in my lower back that made that near impossible. While I would love to say that I pulled that muscle doing something extremely strenuous, in fact, one of our friends told my wife to tell people that I threw my back out while lifting an overturned car to rescue a child. But it was just the simple movement of twisting at the waist and picking up a ceiling fan that was on the floor. I had to do that to move it out of the way while rearranging some furniture in the house. Mind you, though, I was rearranging and moving some heavy furniture, fully automatic leather couch and leather love seat that I estimate weighing in at 1,000 pounds, but just kidding. The furniture is very heavy though. And this was not the first time I had moved it. Counting the rearranging that I was doing last week, I had moved this pair of couches 3 times in the past 2 years. First, it was from my mother's house in North Carolina to my daughter's house here in Sevierville just a couple of years ago. Then last week, my daughter's Beau and I swapped these 2 couches out for the sectional couch that was in our downstairs living room at the beginning of last week. Then it was later in the week as my bride and I were rearranging and assembling the couches that I threw my back out. At first, it felt like just a minor twinge, but after mowing the lawn, I could hardly move. In fact, it hurt just to take a deep breath. That is when I made the executive decision to not put out an episode. Then, after some back and forth with this week's guest, ironing out a schedule, we finally found a time that was suitable for both of us to record this week's episode. I'm incredibly excited to bring this guest on the program to share some insight and some encouragement to the listeners, especially to my fellow Tennesseans that listen to this program. On this week's episode, as well as the next 2 weeks of episodes, I sit down with one of the extremely few true conservatives and a great example of servant leadership who serves in the Tennessee General Assembly. And that would be Representative Jody Barrett. Jody, he's a small business owner, a community leader, a husband, and a father who serves as the state representative for Tennessee's 69th House District. Known for his unique brand of aggressive, courageous, and outspoken conservative leadership, Jody is taking on the tough fights in Nashville and delivering concrete results for local families there in his district. He has quickly established a reputation for standing his ground for what he believes to be right, regardless of the consequences. I will share more of his biography in the next week's episode, but for now, though, and as is the norm for interview episodes, there will not be a break during our discussion. I'll come back on the other side of this first interview segment to give my closing thoughts in addition to this week's wisdom from God's Word. So get ready to take a stand in the arena with Tennessee Representative Jody Barrett. And let's get on with the show. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have today with us Representative Jody Barrett in the Tennessee General Assembly. Is one of the lone conservative voices there. We can follow or count the conservative representatives in the Tennessee General Assembly on one hand, I believe. And so, for a bit of an introduction, Representative Barrett, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hey, first of all, Larry, thanks for having me. I know you've been trying to get in touch with me for a little while to get caught up, but glad we were able to make this happen tonight. To your listeners over there in East Tennessee, I'm Jody Barrett. I'm a state representative from the 69th district over in Dixon, Hickman, and Lewis counties. Attorney here in Middle Tennessee, and just entering, or I guess halfway through my second session in the General Assembly. So. Looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Sweet. So, like I said in the talk before we got on the air here, I really appreciated your principled stand during your vocal opposition to Governor Lee's mislabeled Education Freedom Act, because parents already have a choice and the freedom to educate their children however they want to, just not the means. So that's what they've done. They've conflated the term freedom with financial means. But you were citing concerns about its potential costs exceeding $1 billion annually in one decade. Can you explain why you believe this voucher program is, maybe like I call it, a scam, and how it actually conflicts with conservative principles of fiscal responsibility?
Well, I think there's all sorts of reasons to be skeptical about the actual plan itself, and I think the folks that have supported this bill, and which is now law in Tennessee, is they have made sure that they've hung on to the term educational freedom, right? They're selling this as an educational freedom bill. They don't quite use the term universal, but they kind of throw it out there, pitch it that way. And the real issue that I have is you know again, they use terms like school choice. And if you're not for this bill, then they try to paint you as anti-school choice, which is absolutely ridiculous. I am a homeschool dad, um, one of the only homeschool parents in the state legislature, and I am 100% in favor of school choice, in favor of parents having complete and total control over educational decisions that involve their children. It just so happens that this particular plan that was put out there by the governor, I did not think was a fiscally sound way of doing it. And I think there's constitutional concerns as well that, based very, very plain language on the very plain language of what's in the Constitution with regards to our state's obligation to provide access to free public education. I think we are running aground, as they say, when we're constitutionally with what we're doing here with creating vouchers and sending money to private institutions that charge tuition over and above what the voucher amount relates to. So that's not a free public education. That's private education that's being provided a stipend or supplement. And so, there's a whole host of things that I think that are cause for concern. Now that the battle's been fought and lost, we'll have to sit back and see how it works out. And maybe 10 years from now, I'll be talking to you again saying, "Hey, I was wrong," but I don't think that's going to be the case.
Absolutely not going to be the case. And since you being a lawyer, let's expose or get into that thread a bit. Who would have standing to actually challenge this in a Tennessee court system?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think, anytime you go to a situation where you're trying to challenge the constitutionality of a state law, you're going to have a plaintiff or a petitioner who has a citizenship status or taxpayer status in order to allege that they have been injured by this unconstitutional act of the legislature. So it really, I think that's your basic beginning point. There are a couple of different ways that you can get into federal court or into really get into the state Supreme Court to challenge this, but also there could be a federal challenge that could take place. So, there's Good lawyers can find a couple of different angles to get this done, but the basic principle is you have to have a citizen of the state that's a taxpayer that has standing under the law in order to sue the state to enforce the Constitution.
Okay, so that term taxpayer, that doesn't mean any taxpayer that has a child in the school system. It could be any taxpayer.
Not necessarily, yeah. Anybody that's paying sales tax and or property taxes in the state of Tennessee, you're just going to have to show that you have a nexus to the state and an injury that's being caused that gives you standing in order to bring suit.
Okay, that's something interesting to explore in the future.
Yeah, and of course, there's other options to get the try to get the attorney general involved whenever you feel like something's gone awry. But the attorney general is not going to instigate an action against the state.
Right.
So, there have been there's precedent out there where actual legislators, members of the legislative body, have been able to bring suit. I haven't done research on that recently to see what standing or basis that a member of the General Assembly would have, but I know that's been done in the past and certainly in other states.
Okay, good. Now you mentioned the federal part of this. Now, speaking of the federal, I don't even call it the federal government anymore because federalism has been destroyed in this country ever since the 16th and 17th Amendment were passed. I mean, the states themselves, as a governing body, don't have representation in our bicameral Congress anymore. Senators are nothing more than super House members. They're elected the exact same way.
Right. Well, and look, I think historically, if you go back and study history and how the original Constitution was written, what the how our senators and representatives were originally elected, how our presidents were elected, so much has changed over the 200 plus years of our country being in existence, and we've strayed quite a bit from the original intent. In some ways, good. In some ways, I think maybe we're starting to reap a little bit of what we've sown. Maybe starting to see some of the bad seeds come back. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with you about the loss of federalism, and certainly, the 10th Amendment is the one that I think gets ramrodded or run roughshod over far too often, and you know it takes somebody with a backbone like DeSantis and or others that we've seen that are willing to stand up and push back for states' rights. And we've seen a little bit of a minor comeback of the 10th Amendment in the last 3, 4, 5 years, but still not near as far as I would like to see it.
Absolutely not. Now, along those lines, we saw that President Trump, I mean, thank goodness for his reelection, but he's backed this so-called Education Freedom Act. I mean, he backs school choice. I don't know if he knows the
Yeah, and I think that's the distinction, right? Um, the whole thing during the special session on educational freedom, uh, it was all very orchestrated. Um, the special session itself and the bill's passage was being presented and voted on during school choice week, which was planned in advance. Having President Trump issue an executive order on school choice during that week while our bill was being presented was all done for political theater and political purposes to try to put pressure on anyone who might dare oppose this measure that in air quotes here President Trump endorses. I still would bet a large sum of money that President Trump has never read this bill and does not know the meat of what's in there, because this is not a conservative bill and it does not match in any shape, form, or fashion the notion that he has for school choice. Anybody that's followed along what President Trump has put out there as far as his plan is concerned to support school choice, it all involves tax incentives for personal income taxes and tax rebates, which makes all the sense in the world from a conservative standpoint. Rather than us take your tax money and then tell you how we're going to spend your tax money, why not let's just go ahead and let you keep your money and you decide how to spend it. Makes far more sense from a conservative standpoint than what we're doing here in Tennessee. Unfortunately, what we've done, in my personal opinion, this is Jody Barrett's opinion, may or may not be shared by many other people in the state legislature, but in my personal opinion, all we've done is create a gigantic entitlement program that far more closely resembles Section 8 housing than it does any type of actual school choice or school freedom plan.
Absolutely. And the most of the beneficiaries of this plan, as you know, some studies have shown, is that people that are already paying for their children to be in private schools, they're the biggest beneficiaries of this. Was it 75, 80% of the people that already have their children in private schools? They're gonna take this government money, free money, and just
Even the Finance Review Committee that issues the fiscal notes for the state, uh, the fiscal note that came out on this school choice plan use the data that's available out there. I think it said for 8 states that already have this a similar type plan in place. And based on the data that they've had from multiple years in those other 8 states, that the most that they could predict that would be that these scholarships would go to kids that are in public schools now that would get an opportunity to move from a public school to a private school is about 35%. That means 65% they're predicting will go to kids who are already paying for private school tuition and already have educational freedom to do so. So it's not creating any new freedom for the vast majority of kids. Now, if you look to our neighbors to the west in Arkansas, that number's more in the 90 percentile range. It's a much higher number. Um, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that are similar to Tennessee in that we don't have a large number of metropolitan areas in the state. The vast majority, 95 counties, I think probably 6 of them could be considered urban or more populated than most. The rest of our counties, 88, 89 of them are going to be, largely rural and sparsely populated counties that don't have private schools in them. And I think that information will bear out as we start seeing who these scholarships are going to and where they're being awarded, that it's going to be very heavily concentrated in those 6 or 7 counties.
we have Shelby, Knox, Davidson, Hamilton.
Right.
not
And
not
so
Sevier County.
So the district that I represent in Hickman, Lewis, and Dixon County, we are on the western front of Nashville. We're a bedroom community. Dixon in particular is a bedroom community to Nashville. A lot of our families drive back and forth to work in Nashville, but they choose to live, laugh, and love, as they say, in Dixon County. And they also have their kids in schools here. For part of my district, Dixon County in particular, there will be some opportunities for some families that can send their kids to a private school in Nashville. We don't have a single private school in my district that qualifies for the scholarship plan. So in order for families to utilize this or take advantage of it, they're going to have to drive their children outside of the 69th district to find a school to put their child in. And that's fine. That may be possible for some families, but it's not a universal option for everyone because not everyone can afford it, and not everyone has the ability to drive their kids back and forth to Nashville. So, and then the farther south you go, Hickman County and Lewis County, you're getting further away from the metropolitan centers where there are private schools available. Neither of them have any options as along those lines.
Absolutely. It's it's a shell game. It's mislabeled. Like I said in the beginning, it's mislabeled. It's nothing to do with freedom.
Well, look, we're seeing this in just about every area of politics now, from the federal level all the way down to even local city council stuff. There's marketing plans that get put in place and talking points and narratives that get put out there to support or attack a legislative proposal. And I don't have any ill will against the governor's office or the supporters of this voucher plan for doing their best to sell what they were trying to do. I think it was a very hard sell. And it just so happens that my district in particular wasn't buying.
Right.
Um, they said the folks that were supporting it and pushing it were saying that, this polls well. This is a Republican issue. This is something that's on the Republican platform, and you should be supporting this. Well, I would be happy to have done so if any significant number of my constituents intimated to me that they wanted me to support it. The fact of the matter is, it was 100 to 1 opposed from communications that I got from my district, and those communications included phone calls into my district or into my legislative office, emails that we received. We kept and tabulated every single one of them, all the text messages and phone calls, interactions that I had in church or the grocery store or whatever here in town. Because I am close enough to where I drive back and forth every day.
Mhm.
So even when we're in session, I'm still coming home and running into people, and they're talking to me about things that are going on. So, my district just made it very, very clear that they were not interested in supporting this and they did not want me to vote for it. And so, I had two choices to make. Neither of them included voting for it. uh, I could either vote against it and just be quiet and not say anything, kind of let them go through their motions and let everyone kind of deal with it on their own. But the more we got into it, and the more the narrative was being pushed, and the more the numbers started coming out from uh, the fiscal note on it, I just felt like I had to say something, and nobody was really standing up to ask the questions. And so I wrote a letter to the governor a few days before the session, or right before the special session started, and said, "Hey, look, I'm with you on school choice. I agree with what you're ultimately trying to do, or at least what you say you're trying to do, by opening up avenues for parents to find better options for their kids. But I just don't think this is the way to do it. And it's not it's not enough for me to say I oppose your bill without having, I can't do that or shouldn't do that without presenting some sort of alternative plan. So here's some bullet point items of, I think I put 16, 17, 18 different ideas in there for ways that I think that he could accomplish what he's trying to accomplish in a different way that would be more conservative, more fiscally sound, and actually provide even more options and more freedom for students that are currently, as they say, trapped in a failing public school. Um, and so I never got a response to that letter. Never, my leadership never really tried to get with me to dig down on it. And so, that just kind of left me in a position of trying to make that decision. Do I stay quiet, or do I, start poking the tiger a little bit and start asking some questions?
And I think you did the right thing, which we applaud you for. Now, speaking of leadership, including Speaker Sexton, there's posts out there on all kinds of social media that suggest that he's silenced dissent and retaliated a bit against you and other Republicans like Representative Warner for opposing the bill. Do you,
Yeah, I don't know that there's any direct evidence of that. I think those of us that felt the wrath of some of that certainly feel that way. But I could not point to any specific evidence to say unequivocally Cameron Sexton shut me down or silenced me or retaliated against me. Uh, but that's just kind of the way the game's played. There's got to be plausible deniability. So, but ultimately, I would say this, and I've told Speaker Sexton this. I'm not saying anything that I haven't said to him personally, and that is nothing happens in Cordell Hall, particularly in the House chamber, that he doesn't authorize or okay. And so, my personal experience that I went through this session, um, he would tell you that he didn't have anything to do with it, and maybe that's true, but he certainly didn't do anything to stop it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. That's I've met, my background. I've spent 30 years in the Navy, and I've had my fair share of uh, good leaders, and I've had my fair share of not so good leaders, and how they operate, whether it's politics or whether it's military or whether it's anything else. They all operate the same way, and punishment comes in different forms.
Sure.
And
Some are more overt with it,
right.
or in your face. Um, what I found in the 3 years I've been up there is that if there's punishment being doled out, nobody is forthcoming or uh, upfront in your face with, "Hey, we're punishing you, and here's why we're punishing you, and this is the lesson we want you to learn." It doesn't work that way. At least it hasn't in the 3 years I've been up there. When there's punishment to be doled out, it's always done through back channels and on kind of on a whisper campaign, and everybody points fingers at other people to say, well, it's not me, it's this guy. And if you go talk to that guy, he says, well, it's not me, it's leadership. And if you go talk to leadership, they say, well, it's not us, it's your other members. That it's just this whole game that gets played. And so nobody's willing to just step up and say, hey, I'm mad at you, here's why I'm mad at you, and I'm going to punish you for it. If they would just do that, then we could all rip the band-aid off, get over it, and get on and start working on the next thing. But that's just not the way it works.
Because it could cost them their next election, of course.
Well, if they come out and say, and they're forthcoming about it, then they have to admit and be open that they are playing those political games. It's much more politically expedient for them to deny it, and have other people help cover it up their tracks so that they don't have to answer any questions to anybody else going, hey, are you denying Jody Barrett the opportunity to present any of his bills in committee? Are you making it to where he's having to give bills away in order for them to get heard by other sponsors? Because anything with his name on it's not going to get heard this year. If they had to answer those questions and answer them honestly, then certainly I think that there might be some consequences for that.
And it's just such a shame because there are bills that you and Representative Warner and other conservatives have put forth that won't get heard, but that because of these trans publican power plays, it hurts Tennesseans because of what they're doing to maintain their grip on power. It hurts
Yeah, I
Tennessee as
mean,
a whole.
yeah, they're not hurting me. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't get paid anymore by passing bills or paid any less if I don't pass any bills. My passage to heaven doesn't become any harder or easier. My kids are still going to have a roof over their head regardless. So I mean, they're not hurting me, and particularly because I don't have any political aspirations beyond this. I didn't really want this job to begin with. I only ran for this seat because I didn't want the other guy to get it. Uh, I tell that story a lot, and because of that, because I don't have any, I'm not trying to climb a ladder. I don't want to be the next speaker. I don't want to be the next senator, state or otherwise. I because of that, I'm just here to try to do what's right for the people that I represent. I'm trying to. I tell folks all the time, my job as a representative is to say what my people would say if they were sitting in the room having the conversation, or vote the way they would vote, push the button they would push if they were sitting in the chair. It's not my job to go up there and impose Jody Barrett's will on on the legislature or on whatever it is that we're voting on. It's truly to represent the people of my district. Um, and just not everybody's there for the same reason. Other people have different driving forces behind what they're trying to do. Some of them are personally motivated. Some of them are, you know, promote, trying to climb a ladder or move on to the next level or whatever the case may be. And some of them are just there because it's a nice little retirement plan and it pays good health insurance and makes them a little bit of spending money. And, they don't want to rock that boat and do anything that might be risky that would, risk them, jeopardize them losing that little gig that they've got. I don't have those issues, so I just try to speak truth and do what I think is right, not what's politically right, but what I think is the right thing to do. Because I think the right thing to do is always the right thing to do, no matter what.
Right. Yeah, it's a shame that that's what you just described as being it's the epitome of servant leadership for your constituents. And I think that's a lot of that is missing in elected representatives today, being a servant leader. I say it all the time on the podcast that they've turned from servant leadership to selfish leadership. Like you said, they're in it for themselves. All right, folks, I found a natural pause in the conversation, so I'm going to pause the interview at this point. But rest assured, more great information and discussion will be coming to you in the next week's part 2 of this 3-part interview. This week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 29. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Representative Barrett is truly one of those rare individuals that represent what servant leadership in elected office looks like. The people of his district made the correct choice when selecting him to represent their values, their traditions, and their beliefs in our state's capital. He, along with a small handful of other servant leaders, are standing in the gap between the people of Tennessee and what evidence is showing as an increasingly overreaching government filled with establishment cronies that seek to erode the people's liberty and rob us of our sweat equity. It will be interesting to see if there will come a constitutional challenge to Governor Lee's voucher scam that he forced upon the taxpayers of the volunteer state at the behest of corporatists and out-of-state interests, much as we discussed early in this segment. What we can be sure of, though, is that servant leaders like Jody Barrett will continue to fight the good fight on behalf of not only their individual constituents, but also on the behalf of all citizens of Tennessee. Once again, I would like to ask that you do me a favor and give this episode a thumbs up on Rumble or YouTube. Be sure and hit the notifications button on those platforms to receive a notification when a new episode is released. Additionally, please share the post from the podcast Facebook page if you follow there, or among any of the other audio platforms this show is on. Share it to your social media accounts, share it with your email accounts. Do whatever you got to do to get the word out. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.